Discover the untold story of college hookup culture with American Hookup by Lisa Wade. This insightful and engaging audiobook explores the complexities of modern relationships on campus. They flatly reject the idea that they should be our society's moral compass, especially in college. After all, as everyone knows, bad girls have more fun. Sex and Drunk World, Mara and Naomi sat reclined on the wide porch of a 3-story, 126-year-old house near Penn State. Naomi gazed out across the lawn, her fingers resting gently next to a red cup at her right, and pointed to one of the fraternity brothers playing catch. He threw a chin nod her way. Nonchalantly, she mentioned that she'd had sex with him the night before on a bathroom floor. Tossing back her long, newly blonde hair, she raised her scraped knees so that Mara could see. "He's the ultimate douchebag," she said, "and I hate frat boys." But his body was too good to pass up. Mara peered at him without much interest. "A shirtless guy with sculpted abs and sunglasses," she observed. "He was clearly pretty hot, so it was like it was an accomplishment or something." The two women had been best friends since 6th grade. Both had been a little wild in high school, bonding over drinking, smoking, and a slightly twisted sense of humor. Mara had looked up to Naomi. "She was the one that did all the drugs first," she wrote. "She was super sassy and ran a super fast 60-meter sprint." When college acceptance letters came, she was sad that they'd be parting ways, but it had been her dream since she was 12 to move to California. So, Mara left Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for a small liberal arts college, and Naomi went to State. As a result, higher education became a battleground. Between the mid-1700s and the mid-1800s, there were student protests and uprisings at every school in New England, and most of those in the South, with students objecting to everything from the quality of the food, to the rigidity of schedules, to the content of the curriculum. They sang, yelled, and blew horns late into the night to torture their sleeping professors. They set fire to school buildings, smoked faculty out of their offices, and rolled flaming tar barrels across campus. At Yale, students detonated a bomb, occupied buildings, and drove back a local militia. People got killed in campus riots. Somebody lost an eye. In 1836, for example, University of Virginia students rioted after the faculty informed them that their muskets would be confiscated. That night, dozens of students descended upon campus buildings to do as much property damage as possible. They threw rocks till scarcely a pane of glass in the professors' houses was left unbroken. They occupied buildings and destroyed furniture. They produced a continuous roar of musketry. They used those muskets, alongside an impressive collection of pistols and rifles, to create an intimidating chaos. Faculty members feared for their lives, and a militia was brought in to quell the violence. 66 students were expelled. Expulsions were common. After one riot at Harvard, 62% of the graduating class was expelled. Princeton once expelled more than half its student body. In an effort to make the punishment as powerful a deterrent as possible, college presidents agreed among themselves not to admit students who had been kicked out of other institutions. There was one lone exception. Eliphalet Nott, the president of Union College in Schenectady, New York, defying the consensus, Nott took in the errant sons of the other colleges, which may be one reason why, in the year 1825, Union College became home to one of the biggest rebellions of all, Kappa Alpha, the first social fraternity. Greek life is thoroughly embedded in higher education today, but at first, the two were at odds. The men who started fraternities did so specifically to cultivate values that their professors opposed. They rejected the religious values held by their pious professors and lauded the skills they believed would be useful for winning in this life, not the next. Instead of humility, equality, and morality, fraternities promoted status, exclusion, and indulgence. At a time when the declaration that all men are created equal was still freshly penned, however imperfectly it was applied, fraternity men lauded hierarchy. They used their clubs to isolate themselves from and claim superiority over blue skins, their slur for their middle-class peers. Their attitude was summed up by one 19th century Virginian. "I am an aristocrat," he said. "I love liberty. I hate equality." Fraternities, with their rules about who could and couldn't join, seemed decidedly undemocratic, even un-American. Wealthy young men loved the idea of starting exclusive clubs in defiance of their professors, but faculty and administrators did not. "I would incomparably rather resign my place," wrote the president of Brown University in the mid-1800s, "than allow young men the right to meet in secret when they choose without knowledge of the faculty." College presidents were worried that nothing good could come from young men conspiring out from under the careful supervision of their elders. In 1863, the third president of Amherst confidentially asked his fellow college presidents what they thought of the societies, and the consensus was resounding. "They have led to greater unkindness and ill feeling than almost anything else in college," replied one president. "Their general effect is to sow dissensions and produce factions," wrote another. "They were described as evil and a plague. Eliminating them would be a great blessing and an occasion to rejoice." College presidents made valiant efforts to close them down, but they consistently failed. In just a few decades, there were 299 chapters of 22 fraternities at 71 colleges. Infused with a rebelliousness that was their birthright, fraternities incubated a lifestyle that revolved around recklessness and irresponsibility. Members encouraged one another to neglect their studies and mocked those who were earnest about getting an education, disparagingly calling academically hardworking students digs and grinds. Nicholas Surratt, the scholar who penned the definitive history of white fraternities, wrote that by the early 1900s it was glaringly obvious that, for the most part, fraternity men did not study much, dedicating themselves instead to extracurricular activities, camaraderie, athletics, and having fun. To these preoccupations, fraternities would eventually add sexual conquest. Before the 1900s, fraternity men had sex mostly with prostitutes, poor women, and women they enslaved. Early fraternity men enjoyed these activities. "I did get one of the nicest pieces of ass some day or two ago," wrote one brother to another in 1857, but it wasn't a game. The women they had sex with weren't their social equals, so they had little power to negotiate sexual terms. Since men needed no skill to get access to the women's bodies, there was little basis for masculine rivalry. By 1930, though, women made up 40% of the national collegiate population, and college was becoming a place where young men and women of the same class mingled relatively unsupervised. This changed the way fraternity men thought about sex. Once recreational, it became increasingly competitive. Extracting sexual favors from women who weren't supposed to give them out became a primary way that frat boys earned the respect and admiration of their brothers. Partly in response, the criteria for membership shifted to reflect the social and sexual functions of fraternity life as much as its economic elitism. As a dean at Princeton put it in 1931, frats still preferred to pledge rich men, but they mostly just wanted members who weren't personally unattractive, or in the parlance of the time, wet. The question of family will enter in only if he wishes to make the most exclusively snobbish upper-crust fraternities or clubs, the dean wrote, and even there family cannot prevail over wetness. The modern frat boy was born. By this time, popular interest in college life had reached a fever pitch, and the fraternity man was at the center of the story. His way of doing college was so frequently depicted, so relentlessly glamorized, and so ceaselessly centered that it had become impossible to imagine college without him. And, rather quickly, and here is where his story meets the stories of so many college students in America today, his way of doing college became the way of doing college. Soon it seemed as though everyone sailed through higher education as flippantly as the frat boy. In the newly popular college-themed novel, characters of all types socialized with the other sex, drank alcohol illegally, and danced jauntily to a music called jazz. Party-focused exposés of student life were so ubiquitous and so thoroughly void of any discussion of academics that the dean of men at the University of Wisconsin complained that college students were unfairly portrayed as low-grade morons with flapping socks, fur coats, rickety Fords, and not an idea in their heads beyond necking, booze, and sex literature. Frat culture had become what Life magazine dubbed youth culture, and it was all about having fun. For a while, college administrators continued to try to control students. employing curfews, adult residence hall monitors, punishments for drinking and sexual activity, and other rules and practices meant to protect students from themselves. Rules were especially strict for women. Eventually, the baby boomers put an end to that control. Chafing under the restrictions on their freedom, they demanded to be regarded as the legal adults they were, and they got their wish. By the time the sexual revolution was in full swing, colleges were treating students more or less like adults. For the first time, they were free to do just about whatever they wanted, so long as it was legal, with no institutional sanctions. Things got wild. As the civil rights leader Malcolm X observed in 1965, I imagine that one of the biggest troubles with colleges is there are too many distractions, too much panty raiding, fraternities, and bula bula, and all of that. When Animal House was released in 1978, the alcohol industry saw an opportunity and aggressively ramped up marketing on campus. They started advertising in school newspapers, erecting massive inflatable beer cans at sporting events, promoting drink specials at nearby bars and clubs, and hiring students as representatives of their brands to give beer away for free. They spent millions in the 1980s to convince students that it's naturally part of college life to drink. Between the vision of college life promulgated by the alcohol industry and the founding of Kappa Alpha more than 150 years before, college life had steadily transformed. Nothing emerged to stop or slow the march toward more and more fun until 1984. That year, the U.S. government initiated an effort to reduce highway deaths, informing states that it would cut their transportation budget allocation if they didn't raise the legal drinking age from 18 to 21. By 1987, all states had complied, and campuses were held accountable for policing underage drinking in residence halls. Still, collegiate life was far too drenched in drink to be derailed by such a little thing. College drinking didn't slow down during Prohibition, and it didn't slow down in the 1980s. The new drinking age succeeded only in driving much of the drinking off campus. Today, if students want to party, and they do, they're probably going to do it in rented houses, bars and clubs, sorority functions at local businesses, stadium parking lots, or fraternities. That is how Naomi and Mara ended up going Greek. When Naomi enrolled at Penn State, she discovered that, like many students today, she was required to live on campus for her first year. She was 18, and it was well past 1987. She couldn't legally drink, and her resident advisor enforced the rules. She likely felt comfortable pre-gaming in her dorm, but the real raucous all-out partying and drunkenness couldn't happen there. Her best bet was to go to an off-campus, private location. As a freshman, her networks were limited mostly to other first-year students who also lived in dorms. Like Mara, she probably didn't know many juniors or seniors, and if she did, she didn't know them well enough to get invited to their house parties. There were also obstacles to drinking in bars, namely obtaining a fake ID and the fear of getting caught. In Pennsylvania, the penalties were a $300 fine and up to 90 days in jail. The National Panhellenic Conference forbids sororities from serving alcohol in their homes, so partying at sororities wasn't an option either. Fraternities were among the few places Naomi could party like she believed college students should. At colleges like Mara's and Naomi's, the men of Greek Row are able to corner the market on college partying. In fact, membership in old-line social fraternities and sororities, those whose members are still mostly heterosexual, white, and wealthy, soared after the drinking age was raised. Raising the legal drinking age also resulted in an increase in patronage of nearby drinking establishments. This is where Alondra, another eager partier, went for fun. Fraternities weren't allowed to have houses at her college, so students got drunk and danced at an 18 and over bar and grill called Murphy's that billed itself as the #1 college bar in America, and a club with the motto, "Leave your dignity at the door." Hookups at Murphy's were so common that students referred to them as Murphy makeouts. "It's the center point of it all," one wrote. "Girls and boys alike who want an easy hookup can go to Murphy's and almost have that guaranteed." Perhaps especially on 50-cent shot night. Inside, other than the fact that students had to barely buy drinks, the scene was hardly distinguishable from a traditional fraternity party. Alondra reported one night that she saw at least 15 couples making out on the dance floor and a couple doing questionable acts in a booth. There was lots of very dirty dancing, she emphasized, and men on the prowl. Most colleges have an adjacent strip of bars and clubs that draw in underage students with drink specials and make a ruse out of checking IDs. The University of Wisconsin has State Street, and Louisiana State University has Tigerland, a cluster of bars that offer $3 pitchers, host midget wrestling, and spark fistfights. Tonight's forecast read a recent tweet from one of the favorites, Reggie's, low standards and poor decisions with a large chance of beer showers. If you're a freshman, says an LSU student about the place, you must experience this place or you can't really say you were a freshman. At UC Santa Barbara, a campus on which Greek life is only moderately prominent, students just party in the streets. On a 4-block drive colloquially called DP, houses with up to 15 rooms rented by groups of students serve as a de facto Greek row. Just as students know they can skirt liquor laws and campus rules at a fraternity house, they know they can go to Del Playa Drive and party pretty much as hard as they want. At Princeton, students congregate in on-campus eating clubs, all mixed gender since a 1990 court order. At Harvard, there are single-sex social organizations called Final Clubs, now under pressure from the university to integrate. Writing about both, journalist Bryce Sofer explains, the clubs have a monopoly on spaces where underage students can consume alcohol without fear of legal repercussions. The Final Clubs occupy mansions in Harvard Square, and some host parties that allow only members and conventionally attractive young women to attend. The eating clubs occupy mansions on Prospect Avenue or the street and throw large parties open to everyone. Locations vary, but wherever the party occurs, it's at least a little inspired by those first fraternity boys. Their lifestyle has become a part of college life for all. Excited to live it up? Lots of students arrive on campus ready to go wild, break the rules, and flirt with peril. Like those errant men almost 200 years ago, they want their partying to smack of revolt. In Getting Wasted, sociologist Thomas Vander Ven describes the typical college party as a good, frothy mixture of dramatic drunkenness, human wreckage, and primitive behavior. It's mayhem, temporary derangement, an excuse for a few hours of insanity. Vander Ven was the one who coined the term drunk world to capture the sense that a college party is a world apart, a different universe with disorienting and disordered laws. Things get out of hand, Vander Ven observes, but in an entertaining sort of way. A Duke student described college partying as a whirlwind of drunkenness and horniness. Those are the two main ingredients. In fact, students from Bowdoin, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Illinois at Chicago have all used the phrase hand in hand to describe the relationship between partying and hooking up. That's the culture, wrote one of my students. You go to a party together, everyone gets wasted, and the goal of the night is to get some. It's more than just a norm, insisted another. It is near an obligation. Sex and alcohol, she continues, are the two essential ingredients for any college party that is deemed fun, and the potential for sexual contact is quite often the only reason students socialize. It's what all the parties are about, wrote a third with finality. Of course, some students absolutely love this. At the University of Pennsylvania, an enthusiastic female student wrote, "Sometimes we just want to have sex for sex's sake. What's wrong with that?" At Princeton, a woman found hookups to be rewarding, mutually fulfilling, and memorable. From a single guy's point of view, explained a student at Yale, I find few things more fun than going out at night and seeing what I can come home with. One of my female students put it like this: practically unlimited and uninterrupted sex whenever I feel like it, I don't think I could pass that offer up. She was delighted by hookup culture. Students who are on the fence about whether to hook up, though, can find that doing so can feel, as 4 of my students separately intoned, inevitable. It certainly felt that way for Mara. She described 5 hookups in her first year, but only a couple of times were they intentional. The rest were happenstance. One night, for example, she found herself stranded at a house party at a college across town. Her 2 girlfriends had disappeared, and she watched as the first floor of the house slowly emptied out. she found herself alone with an acquaintance who lived there. When she told him that she wasn't sure how to get home, he gestured hospitably to a threadbare tan couch that she remembered seeing someone spill beer on earlier in the night. At this point, it was very late and I was very tired, she recalled, so I figured I just had to take my chances. She accepted his hospitality, but she didn't take the couch. Not because it was less than inviting, which it was, but because she felt obligated to hook up with her host. In her mind, she owed him a hookup because he was providing shelter. Sleeping on the couch was akin to having bad manners. They hooked up, but it was low-key, she reported, and they went to sleep pretty quickly. I was very lucky that this guy ended up not being creepy, she wrote in retrospect. Mara may have been lucky, and sexual coercion by peers is a serious problem on college campuses, but her story reveals a different kind of coercive pressure. In fact, she specified that she generally didn't feel pressured by men. She knew that she could say no and felt capable of doing so, but hookups were so powerfully built into the party script that it seemed wrong not to go along. Saying no to a hookup at that stage of the night was like going for a jog in a tuxedo or taking your cat to the park. It was just weird. She wasn't always motivated enough to make things weird. It was only worth making a scene if I really didn't want to do it, she explained. If I didn't really care, it would just continue. So there were several instances in which she hooked up with a guy because it felt like it was just the thing to do.